Popular Canon lens primarily because of its inexpensive price tag and the fact that it's great for getting that shallow depth of field look that everybody loves, especially in low light conditions. But after several years, we now have a replacement for this lens with the 50mm f1.8 STM. Now we're going to be taking a look at the differences between the two in terms of image quality, internal and external features, and really determine whether this new STM lens is worth owning or even good enough to replace the original 50mm f1.8 lens. So if you're interested in that, let's get right into it. Now, there's certainly a good reason why the original 50mm version 2 Canon lens was so popular to begin with, mainly due to the fact that it was more about image quality than anything else, and it was really lacking in one thing, and that was build quality. It was primarily made out of really cheap plastics. I personally went through about 3 lenses in 5 years, so it's definitely not as durable as many of the higher end lenses that you're going to come across, and that's one of the reasons for that price tag. Now, the new 50mm STM lens is way better in terms of build quality. It's still made out of polycarbonate plastics, but it's a higher grade plastics. As soon as you start using this new 50mm lens, you're going to notice a pretty big difference between the original when it comes to the feel and overall ergonomics of it. The focus ring is a lot better. It's rubberized now and it has very little breathing. It's an electronic focus, so in order to use it, you do need an electronic connection between the lens and the camera itself. Otherwise, you won't be able to focus it even in manual mode. Unlike the original 50mm lens, which allowed you to do manual focusing regardless if you had it connected to a camera or not once you have it in manual focus mode. So that's definitely a plus side on the original lens for people that do any kind of lens adapting to other cameras that might not have control over their focusing. But as we mentioned before, ergonomically, this new 50mm STM lens is a lot better in terms of focusing, and when you have it connected to your Canon camera, it's pretty easy to manual focus as well, and you could probably even attach a follow focus system. Another improvement on the STM lens is that now we have a metal lens mount, so that's definitely a lot better than the plastic one we had on the original 50mm version 2, so that's definitely going to be a huge improvement when it comes to the durability aspect of things. Furthermore, the new lens is just a little bit heavier at 159 grams versus about 130 grams compared to the original, and that's not really a bad thing at all. I prefer a little bit more heft on the new lens, and it definitely adds to the level of build quality and ergonomics in my opinion. Now at this point, I do want to mention that the new 50mm lens is not weather resistant, so you definitely want to be careful when you're outdoor in kind of rainy environments or dusty environments, so it's not going to be as durable as your L lenses from Canon or any of the other premium lenses you're going to find from other companies. Now moving right along, let's talk about the specifications of both these two lenses in detail. Now in terms of the aperture range, they're both identical with a range of f1.8 to f22, and in terms of the lens construction, both are comprised of 6 elements and 5 groups. There is, however, a super spectra coating on the STM lens, which is going to translate into less ghosting and flaring than the previous model, while at the same time it's going to help enhance the light transmission, color optimization, and overall color accuracy and reproduction of the lens. There is also another difference in terms of the number of aperture blades. We have 5 aperture blades on the original versus 7 circular blades on the STM. That's going to translate into rounder, out of focus bokeh elements when you stop things down. So definitely improvement there if you want to get nice rounded out of focus elements. Furthermore, the new STM is also better when it comes to the minimum focusing distance being a little bit closer at around 0.35 meters or 1.1 feet compared to the original's 0.45 meters or 1.5 feet. So if you want to get a little bit closer, looks like the new lens is going to get you a little bit better in terms of the macro capabilities. Continuing forth, one of the major differences between these two lenses is the focusing system itself. Now we're using the standard servo motor that sounds like R2-D2 on the original 50mm lens versus the new one is using a new step motor system, which is very, very quiet. Now we're going to do an illustration of that in just a little bit, but in terms of filter sizes, looking at a thread size of 52mm versus 49mm on the new version. Now let's move on and talk about one of the major differences between these two lenses, and that's of course the focusing system. Now with the stepper motor, you're going to have a lot more accurate and faster focusing in general, both for photos and videos, but it's specifically designed to work great for any of the Canon cameras that are using the dual pixel hybrid AF system. So we're talking about the 70D, the 7 7D Mark II and some of the other cameras that have that capability as well. That's going to translate into really great autofocusing capabilities when it comes to shooting photos in live view mode, and of course shooting video that looks very natural and almost looks like you're focusing manually, even though it's the autofocusing system that's doing all the work. Now, let's take a listen to the autofocusing system on both these two lenses to really hear whether there's a difference between the two. Now, as you heard right there from that example, the new STM lens is certainly going to live up to its name by being a lot faster and certainly a lot quieter than that original 50mm lens, which is really loud and pretty slow as well. Now, let's move on to the image quality differences between the two, and the camera that we're going to be using to do all of our testing is the 7D Mark II. Now, this is a crop sensor camera, but you can easily use this lens for a full frame camera because it is designed for both of the two formats, but we are going to get a 35mm equivalent of about 80mm, so just keep that in mind for all of our testing. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is test for barrel distortion on both these two lenses. Now, keep in mind, since we're pretty much at 80mm, you're not going to find a lot of barrel distortion. One of the great things about the 50mm lens is that it's definitely a lot more solid and a lot more symmetrical in terms of its image profile compared to most of your zoom lenses and wider lenses out there. So definitely you can see there's really no improvement from the old generation to the new generation. They're both fairly straight when it comes to this test. Moving right along, you can see in terms of the vignetting effect on both these two lenses, there's really not a big difference between the two. At f1.8, both exhibit some fall off in the corners, with the center being the brightest point. And once you stop down to f2.8 and beyond, both lenses kind of correct that vignetting effect, but it's pretty mild to begin with, and there's certainly no improvements that the new STM has inherently over the original version 2 in terms of the vignetting. Now let's test out that super spectral coating we have on the new STM to see if it translates into less ghosting, fringing, and even chromatic aberration. Now, taking a look at this example over here, where you can see close up that there's a little bit less fringing on the new STM lens, a little bit less ghosting, and in terms of lens fringing or chromatic aberration, you're going to see that there's a tad less on the new STM lens. There's not a big difference between the two, but certainly a little bit less fringing when it comes to this example that you're looking at right over here, and certainly any kind of ghosting and fringing does become a non-issue once you stop down, but this is specifically at f1.8. Now, the key thing that I was really interested in the new lens is to see how sharp it is compared to the original lens, and surprisingly at f1.8 there is a pretty big difference between the two. You can see from this example over here that this $5 Canadian bill, there's certainly a lot more inherent contrast and detail, and things look a lot sharper and clearer at f1.8 on the new lens compared to the original lens. Now, of course, I may not have the best copy of my 50mm lens, but I've done some testing on my friend's 50mm, and it's fairly similar in terms of the results over here. So generally speaking, at f1.8, you are going to find a little bit better contrast, a little bit better sharpness, and inherently better looking photos at that f1.8 level. Now, in terms of the sharpness throughout the entire field of view, of course, it's going to be sharpest at the center, with the corners being less sharp at f1.8, but again, as you stop down, a lot of these problems get solved. And around f2.8, both are very, very similar. Again, the new lens might have just a slight advantage, but not a big difference between the two. And past f5.6, they're virtually identical in terms of sharpness. No real difference there. Now, the sweet point of both these two lenses is probably around f7 to about f13, and after f13, both are not as sharp with the result of diffraction kicking in. And from my experience shooting f22, you're going to see pretty much the exact same results on both these two lenses. Again, I have to emphasize the fact that they're pretty much identical after f5.6. So definitely, if you're wanting to do any kind of landscape photography or anything like that, both lenses are pretty much identical in terms of that. But anything regarding low light point and stuff you're going to be shooting at f1.8 or f2 or something like that, you are going to find better results, generally speaking, on the new STM lens. Lastly, for all you video shooters out there, certainly the lens to get will be the new 50mm STM, because of the fact that it can do that hybrid AF focus really well, and it's very quiet in terms of that focusing. And plus, you can actually use the manual focusing at any time, even if you have it set to autofocusing, which is kind of nice. And in summary, I would have to say, in most of the ways, the new STM lens is a definite improvement of the original 50mm f1.8 version 2. So if you're in the market for a 50mm lens and you're kind of on a budget, it's really a no-brainer now. Definitely go for this if you're a Canon shooter, opposed to the original. The original is still great if you find a good deal on it. It's still a great lens to have, especially if you want something really inexpensive and you're a first-time photographer or videographer and want to just get your hands dirty. But definitely check out the new STM as well. Definitely let me know if you guys have any questions at all. And if you like this video, definitely check out the description down below where you'll find links to all the products we talked about. And if you go through any of our specific Amazon links, it'll actually give us a little bit of kickback. Doesn't cost you anything extra, but it helps make videos like this possible. We thank everyone that goes through our Amazon links. It really does help support the channel. And